when you talk to a potential customer, you're not actually talking to a rational, logical human being. What you're actually doing is you're talking to their brain, and their brain is complicated. And actually, there are different parts of the brain that work independently in the decision-making process. So the rational, logical arguments are dealt with by the newer part of the brain, which is the neocortex, which is the outer part of the brain. But the neocortex actually has no decision-making capabilities. It can advise and it can justify and it can suggest, but it can't actually make any decisions. All of the actual decision making happens in an older part of your brain called the limbic system, sometimes referred to as the lizard brain, which is the cerebellum and other slightly more inward parts of your brain. They're actually a lot older and deal with keeping you safe, they deal with emotions, they deal with social connections, and it's this older part of the brain that actually makes decisions on emotional reasons, and then the outer brain justifies it later on. So you've got a problem because the lizard brain can veto all buying decisions, and yet what happens is when we produce our marketing, we only tend to appeal to the rational, logical side of the brain. So one of my favorite models to explain this is Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. Simon Sinek has a book called Start With Why, which is recommended reading. But what Sinek says is that if people are going to buy from you, they need to really understand why you exist. The problem with most marketing is it talks about what you do, which is the easiest thing to write about because you're familiar with your features, you're familiar with your benefits, you know about your products. It's easy to write about what you do. It's slightly more difficult to write about how you do it, and it's harder still to explain why you do what you do. But people have to understand why before they'll listen to how and what. Martin Luther King gave the I have a dream speech, not the I have a plan speech. He got people to buy into why he believed what he believed, and then the how and the what came later. And that's why we tell stories. We tell stories to build the trust, to explain your why, so that you can then deliver how and what logical information. This isn't a replacement for logical information. It lays the groundwork so that people are actually receptive to your sales arguments. And storytelling, actually, when you look further back in time, was possibly the entire basis of human survival. This wooden lion was found in a bog in Slovakia in Eastern Europe. And remarkably, it dates to 35,000 BC, which is roughly the time when modern humans, Homo sapiens, were first arriving in Europe. And when modern humans first arrived in Europe, there was already another species of human living in Europe called Neanderthals. And the Neanderthals were bigger than us, they were better adapted to the climates, they had bigger brains. Archaeology suggests that they had better tools than us. So the big question in archaeology is, why did Homo sapiens survive and Neanderthals die out? And the answer might lie in this lion, because this lion wasn't found in isolation. Very similar lions have been found up to 50 kilometers apart. And what this shows is that very early humans were telling stories to each other. They were telling stories, they were creating art, and it's the stories and the art that bind people together in a shared culture and a shared identity. Whereas Neanderthals, the evidence suggests that Neanderthals only ever lived in small, isolated tribes. And that's, I mean, we'll never know for certain, but that's one theory as to how we survived and Neanderthals didn't. And this pattern emerges all over the world, wherever you look. This artifact is called a quipu. It was found in northern Peru, and it was made by a people called the Chachapoyan people, who lived in northern Peru before the Inca conquest. So this quipu dates from around 1100 AD. And we think now that this wasn't meant to be worn. It probably wasn't the headdress or anything like that. But what it is that each strand on the quipu has a series of knots. And those knots are all different sizes and they're spaced different lengths apart. And what we think is that the quipu actually represents a history or a narrative or a shared story. And it's that shared story that binds people together and allows civilizations to succeed. And when you think about it, every civilization has an origin story. So the English were obsessed for hundreds of years with the story of King Arthur, who's supposed to have fought off Anglo-Saxon invaders in the 5th century AD. In America, you have the story of the Declaration of Independence, the ideals of which still underpin, American society and American worldview today. In Rome, the Romans had the story of Romulus and Remus, who were allegedly suckled by a wolf, which, when you think about it, is entirely preposterous. But what the story does is it binds people together. It binds people into a shared culture, a shared identity. And if you think about America, like North America is a huge continent. But if you're in the USA, you're bound together by a shared story, and it's the shared story that provides shared values, and the shared values allow bigger achievements to be achieved. So storytelling is really powerful. It really underpins our society, and it's also the fabric of life. You tell stories all day long. You listen to stories all day long. If I step outside my house today and I get on a tram, or if I go to the pub, I'll hear stories. And we're so used to hearing stories that we don't clock them as being stories. It's only when we go to write a marketing email and we put on our rational brains and we forget all about stories and we think, oh, our customers are actually rational and they want to hear about features and benefits. And that's true to an extent. And the people who already understand why you do what you do want to hear about your features and benefits. But until you've communicated your why and built that groundwork of trust, all of the information about your features and your benefits is of no use whatsoever. When we write marketing emails, we also tend to distinguish between nurture emails and sales emails. So I need to riff on this for a second because, in my opinion, a nurture email is any email you send that builds a stronger relationship with your recipient. That's my definition. And by that definition, most of the emails that I send are nurture emails. It just also happens that some of them also sell. So when you're telling stories and when you're communicating your why, it doesn't mean that you can't be selling and that you can't be moving people down a progression path that leads them to spend larger amounts of money with you. You very much can do those things. You can nurture and you can sell at the same time.